to talk quietly. All right, we're going live-ish.
All right.
Live-ish. I think it's working. It's probably working. Let's see here. All right. Well, we're apparently live now.
Welcome to Composer Talk, beloved viewers. We're back.
This is Zach and Jacob. Again, this is Composer Talk Week 4. Wow, we've been consistent. We've got some interesting stuff to mention, news-wise and whatnot, and a couple of little tidbits, and then we've got some interesting ideas that have been brought to the forefront. So let's dive right. Actually, I'm going to get the most recent version of the doc because I had it open when you edited it. Do you want to go ahead and talk
I'll
about
go
your
ahead and
first
start. First on our news list, David Lang, a eminent composer, one of the founders of Bang on a Can, is writing a new work. I think he's actually finished writing the new work. It's called Symphony for a Broken Orchestra. In a few weeks here, a bunch of both professional and amateur musicians in Philadelphia will be getting together to play this piece, which is scored for over 400 instruments from Pennsylvania's public school systems that are broken and in need of repair. The composition is supposed to raise awareness to how broken our music education is in our public schools and how underfunded it is, and our lack of resources that students are having to play on instruments that really do not function. So I'm not sure if there are any plans for a recording or for a stream of this or of any sort, but I'd definitely be interested in listening to it. I don't know if it will be good per se or simply more of a statement, a message kind of piece. But apparently Lang he was made aware of the particular defects these instruments had, and wrote the music specifically for those. So I think it should be interesting. There's elements of indeterminacy in the score, as well as some unconventional notation, generally speaking.
I'm a big fan of, indeterminate and all that kind of stuff. And part of that stemmed from, I had high school orchestra with like a really, I'll just say interesting man, Andy Johnston.
Yeah.
The way I got introduced to indeterminate and aleatory music was through a piece called The Medication Song. I believe I've mentioned this to you in the last week or two. Basically, at some point, this is in like the late 90s, I believe, he decided, my students should know about aleatoric music, but they're not really understanding it. I'm going to have them play it. So he just, in an afternoon or a morning or something, he just sketched out. It's a ridiculous piece. It's just got things like indeterminate pizzicatos and Mary Had a Little Lamb Getting Eaten by Jaws, lots of funny moments, a cell phone chorus in more recent years. And he just had them play it, and it wasn't really named anything. It was just called, I think it was just like a piece for orchestra or something, and then someone from the ensemble was, after listening to the piece, after having them play it and then listening to the recording after the concert, someone just raised their bow, as you do in an orchestra, and he was like, yes, and then she was just like, Mr. Johnston, you really need your medication. So it's a perfect piece. I kind of want to bring it back. I really want to play that piece here at some point at University Vocal. Oh, hey, yeah, good advertisement there. And I want to do it here at OU sometime.
And there are kids as young as 8 who are going to be playing in this orchestra of 400 musicians. So besides being a statement about the state of music in our public schools, it's also a good educational opportunity for these kids.
I learned a lot, too. I learned a lot about not just playing my instrument, but also in hearing music in different ways and figuring out, how is a bunch of ringtones music? That's actually kind of cool.
In the article about this, it comes from the Philadelphia Inquirer. There's this. They apparently interviewed one of the kids who's part of this, and they asked him about what it was like playing a broken instrument, and the kid said something to the effect of, well, it's going to be hard, but I'm sure if I do my best and try hard, it'll turn out okay.
It's like almost cheesy, but it's so true.
It's like the cutest thing.
I mean, honestly, and I've seen some of these. Like, do you remember? Did I ever show you the really broken bass at Drury University?
I've probably seen it.
It got ditched sometime my senior year, so I don't know if you have seen it. Basically, that's not a huge exaggeration of how a lot of instruments are in public school systems. Like, there was for instance, if you have a bunch of high schoolers playing double bass or cello, they can't afford that.
They don't have $10,000 sitting around.
Well, to be fair, the student ones are like
you can buy
$2,000.
A cheap one for
even that's a bit pricey.
Right.
My first student cello was actually $2,000.
Yeah.
We had to replace it 2 years later.
Well, and that's why everybody plays guitar. It's because they're cheap.
They're $150. Got it.
I mean, if you want a decent one, you're talking more about $500 for a decent quality instrument.
See, that's like the price of like my bow.
Yeah.
That's like half the price of my bow actually, and I got it on sale.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, like even at where both of us went to undergrad, there is this. It was a private institution, not directly related to the public schools, I guess, but there was a basement that had a bunch of really broken instruments in it.
Horrible.
There was one year we had like a Halloween concert the orchestra did, and we
did it a few times.
But at least that one year when I was there, we used a bunch of those instruments to make an instrument graveyard in the lobby.
I was really proud. The year before you got there was when we conceptualized that, and I just had this idea. I was like, "Hey, Selka, come help me with this. This is gonna be great." And she's like, "Oh my god, what am I helping Zach with now?" And basically, my friend Selka and I, we had a very interesting time in undergrad. We did we were kind of like we can't really do anything to them because they're like good musicians, but we were also kind of unhinged in what we decided to do. So I just let myself into this basement closet, probably not approved, but I let myself in and I found all these decrepit instruments that I knew were there, and we put together this really destroyed jank marimba. Like, I made it, and I even sat there and I like undid some of the wiring a bit of holding the actual wooden pallets in place, and I actually had them like under the thing in a couple instances, and I even had I think 5 or 6 keys that were like actually sagging under the marimba. It was beautiful, and then we even had like a little mouse inside an old tuba. It was wonderful, and then we also had the decrepit bass, and I think she had like a skeleton hand inside that. I don't know. It was wonderful. Like, the things you can do with old decrepit instruments are awesome, but this is kind of a better version of that.
This is trying to make old decrepit instruments not old and decrepit anymore.
I think I made them more decrepit.
A restorative approach rather than a destructive approach.
Well, yeah. Well, anyways, I mean, I'm looking at this article here. It's really all true. I mean, I went to a fairly well-off high school orchestra. We had a great booster club. We didn't get much funding from the school itself, but, we had a really good program, and there were some of our kids in this. I mean, it's one of the best high school orchestras in the state of Missouri, and they're sitting there playing on this, cello that's, like, half falling apart because there are no school instruments, and the one that they inherited from their brother is, like, disintegrating. And it's like, oh, it's horrible, but I'm glad that stuff like this is becoming more prominent. There was something like that in California, but that was we talked about that in week 1, I believe. But I think that took a dark turn after a while with the flutes.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think we didn't talk about that on here.
Then we're not
and
talking
maybe
about
we
that
shouldn't.
On here. No. If you're curious, look up California flute and contamination. You'll find it. It's beyond the scope of this show, but boy howdy is it a read. So moving on, do you want to talk about this next one too?
This is just a little bit of a quick news bite. The Lincoln Center in New York is ending their eponymous self-titled festival. That has been kind of a staple of the New York music scene for several years. They're not ending all their summer programs, but they're apparently going to be placing more focus on their mostly Mozart festival, and as well as a couple other things they do. The Lincoln Center Festival isn't something I'm particularly familiar with, but when I was reading about this, it appears to be more of an interdisciplinary thing, not strictly focused on music, and trying to raise awareness and get representation for composers of color, female composers who aren't very well represented in conventional orchestra programming, which is an unfortunate thing. So a good thing that the Lincoln Center was doing that. I don't know all the details of why they decided to pull the festival, and of course we don't know how the other programming is going to change, if they will continue to try to raise awareness about underrepresented composers and do interdisciplinary stuff in other venues. As it is now, it looks concerning.
So reading through this right now, it actually seems like it's more just a refocus. And honestly, we've done that here at OU a few times. Like, there was a very infamous time, for instance, and something similar to this, where we had the mistake of hosting a National Student Electronic Music event. That's the name of it, NSEAM.
Right.
We were hosting that on the same weekend as the Jazz Festival that was happening in the same building. We didn't interfere with room, but the problem is there's only so many extension cords that a school of music has. So that was problematic. I ended up having to run home and grab like all of mine. But I think it seems like that's part of what they're doing here, because they're trying to step off their own toes, so to say, because like they've got their mostly Mozart and they've got a lot of stuff up there.
And why it was, I was saying, I was about to say concerning, but I wouldn't pass any judgment until I'd gone to study it further, and it could just be, like you're saying, administrative, logistical stuff. As far as
it seems like that's what it is, because I'm seeing some of the trigger words here. Things like, refocusing, wrapping up the competition, things like that. So I think it's more just they don't want to be in competition with themselves. And honestly, I can't blame them. I mean, I've done the same thing with my personal stuff. Like, if I just finished a composition, I'm not going to release a second composition the second day, because it actually reduces the views on my second composition that I post on my website nearly permanently. It's a really fantastic phenomenon to check out. But yeah, oversaturation, I think they're just combating that.
And we'll see. I mean, it's New York. There's lots of new music going on in New York, so I don't think they're going to be strapped for creativity. Yeah. But yeah. So
well, next on the docket, I got more news about #Dorico. I love Dorico. But no, they just launched the official Dorico website. No longer just a subsite of Steinberg. It's actually quite a slick little website. I'll pull it up here.
Yeah, it's
Have you seen it yet?
Yeah, I took a look at it.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's wonderful. Basically, they finally took the main info off of the Steinberg page. You still got to go to the Steinberg page to actually download the software and actually get the free trial and pay for it and all that. But they finally compiled all of it into a nice, beautiful little website here. In fact, I can go ahead and pull that up really briefly. But while I am, I'll also mention that they've had quite a push, I guess, towards getting getting all of their kind of ducks in a row as far as offering all these. Here we go. Let's close that. There we go. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. But yeah, you can see this is a nice, pretty website. I'm gonna go ahead and do this. Yeah, I've got it on screen. Right. But there we go. Woo! Sorry about that, folks. But yeah, you can see it down.
I'm still
over
here.
There. Yeah, on top of Jay. Here, I'll put it right here. There we go. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, right up here, you can see they just got all this stuff in one place finally, and this is stuff that for the most part has actually kind of been on their Facebook page for some reason. And I think it's mostly because of the issues just with they were the new dogs, so to speak, and they really wanted to focus on the software. And I don't know, I like this. And also they've yet again extended the ability to get the cross grade and all that. And now there is a permanent link for try 30 days of Dorico free. Hint, hint, wink, wink. You should do it. It's great. But yeah, so I'm happy about that. And then this is also going to help with pushing forward the workshops and all that. So I'm really, really excited to see where this takes Dorico, because they're finally kind of in the same field, so to speak, as, Finale or Sibelius or any of the others. So I'm happy about that. But so
I don't
Anyways.
don't have anything to say. I have not tried this.
You need to. There's no excuse now. There's a permanent 30-day free trial. You can talk about the next topic.
Our final item on the news list is orchestrator and composer Thomas Goss is working on a Songs of Moana project. I'm not sure of a lot of the details from this. I mean, you sent me a Facebook post about it, and I think what the noteworthy aspect of it is that he's a non-house orchestrator, and the first one to be given, I suppose, permission.
The music for Moana,
right?
Yeah.
To take a shot at arranging these for orchestra. And
it's a pretty big deal because Thomas Goss, for those that don't know, he runs orchestration online. He's a wonderful resource for young orchestrators and composers.
Mm-hmm.
He has got a website, wonderful YouTube channel. I totally recommend it. Like, if as soon as you know what this, go check out some of his introductory to orchestration courses because they're wonderful, top notch. But it is a very big deal because for a large company like Disney to basically say, okay, we're going to trust this outside party, that's pretty big news. And also it opens up more possibilities of someone kind of moving up in the world, so to speak, because that means that, I mean, yeah, me and you are out of the question for working for Disney right now, but in the future, I mean, that totally opens up the doors that weren't really open for you, because I think it's kind of because the idea of the house composer is slightly decaying. The only industry where you really see the true house composer is with with video games, and even then it's been rocky lately. Ever since Martin O'Donnell got fired, we're still kind of trying to figure that out. But in general, I mean, outside video games, you just can't have the house composer job anymore. It's just not a thing.
And I know developments like this, I take interest in them because there's stuff, kind of more popular idioms. I guess musicals and shows where I'd like to kind of take a crack someday at arranging, or like
fun.
I've always kind of wanted to do a theme and variations on the Doctor Who theme. The da 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 da, like if any of you have watched Doctor Who, you should. It's amazing. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there, in popular culture that I kind of see as, I'd like to take this and do something with it someday. I don't know that if I emailed the BBC right now, they'd let me take a crack at Doctor Who arranging.
Well, you never know. I mean, I almost got permission from Nintendo for the Wind Waker,
and that was only because they already had somebody doing it.
Basically, long story short, I made an awesome arrangement of, if you don't know, Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker has amazing music. From Koji Kondo, and I just on my own and kind of on the idea of a younger friend of mine just made an awesome arrangement. And at the last second, after Nintendo was like, yeah, it's a good idea, at the last second they're like, on second thought, no, and they couldn't tell me why. And I'm just sitting there like, well, that's weird. And then like 2 months later they had the big 25th anniversary for Legend of Zelda thing, and basically Koji Kondo had his own rendition of it. And I'm very proud of myself, though, because a lot of our ideas were similar on how to orchestrate it better. So, I mean, I'm proud of that. I mean, there are some things that he did significantly better than me, obviously, but he's got several years of experience, and it's his music. But, yeah, that was it's not really unfortunate. It was more just kind of like a, missed that. Like, if I had done that half a year earlier, man, that would have been wonderful. I'm going to turn that down, but that snap kind of, shot off the
starting
charts.
to clip a bit.
Yeah. All right.
Well, that should wrap up our news for the day. Last time, we started talking about, in the middle of the show, technology in music production and its role, and how composers should think about technology and use it. There was an article that was put out. I remembered this. It was several months ago, and there have been several kind of think pieces to this effect that have come out recently, but specifically dealing with technology in music production, asking the question of if music has become too perfect, and the flow out of that is and this author specifically used pop music as an example, but we've come to expect our recordings to be completely technically perfect, completely on the beat, completely on tune, with no real room for human error or variation. This author, who I don't remember the name of the guy who wrote the article. I found it at Quartz. It specifically focused on in popular music the click track that the drummer's supposed to follow when they record a song, and he talked about that idea of tempo and rhythm becoming this rigid thing that you have to follow precisely, kind of expanding outward to, for example, the human voice, where now auto-tune is used on practically every commercially available recording. Whether or not the singer can sing in tune, the subtle inflections in the human voice they're not always perfectly in tune, and they never will be, and we've in our recording practices decided to correct these. And in classical music, I mean you see some of the same things. I mean, maybe
actually,
yeah.
If I think it's actually worse because it's part of the whole we've been playing the same music for 300 years thing. I mean, we know exactly in our heads now how Mozart 40 is supposed to sound.
Right.
So if your orchestra that you're playing in misses a single of one bassist, one violinist, one flute, anything messes up a note, the recording is subpar because we have reached perfection of that recording. And an interesting idea that I just thought of is, I mean, yeah, there's musical expression and all that, but once you have, to the composer's instructions, performed the piece to the utmost perfection, is it worth striving for that perfection anymore? I mean, outside of nuance and all that, things like, oh, I'm going to take a different interpretation, but if you're going for, quote, the strict interpretation, let's just say the exposition of Mozart 40, I mean, we've already reached perfection with that. So, I mean, is there a point in trying to record your perfection of it?
I agree with you on this. I really don't see the point in orchestras continuing to record Mozart 40 over and over again. I don't think we should stop performing the piece, because I think there's something to be said about live performances continuing our musical tradition. Of course, we've gone way too far in the direction of just playing old music.
Yeah.
But even apart from that, as far as recordings go, honestly, I don't see why anyone would want to make another recording of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. There's already plenty of recordings of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Perform it live, sure, but there's much better things we could spend our time making more recordings of, like many of the great pieces of contemporary music that have no professional recordings. I was just looking at I've listening through some of the pieces that have won the Pulitzer Prize in the past 100 or so years.
Right.
And there's a composer named Shulamit Ron, great composer, taught at the University of Chicago for a very long time, has several professional recordings of her orchestral music. She won the Pulitzer Prize in, I think, 80-something, or I think it was in 1990 actually, with her first symphony. And I'm like, oh, I want to listen to this. And there is no recording available. Not even a bootleg one on YouTube that I could find. No, and definitely no professional.
Stick Ashley on it. Ashley has found me some recordings I couldn't find. She's good at that stuff.
And I'm sure if it won the Pulitzer, it was performed. I'm sure there is a recording somewhere. It just may not be publicly available.
Again, stick Ashley on it. She's wonderful with that. Just tell her the composer in the piece. She will.
I've thought about emailing Shulamit Ron actually and asking for a recording. She probably couldn't send me one. There's probably copyright issues involved.
Sometimes. I mean, for the most part, this goes back to something that I'm dealing with a lot just for some work stuff right now. But you can't really copyright the audio as long as you produce the audio. It's mainly the distribution of sheet music. It's like, for instance, Dr. Lamb can hand me all the recordings he wants to of his performances, but he has to special order a score if I want to look at a score. Same like when Dr. Shames did his music I think it was last year, Sound and Horn. I don't know. No, it was 2 years ago that Sound and Horn was done. Basically, despite the fact that Dr. Lamb was the composer, he had to get permission from the publisher. I mean, the audio, sure.
Well, because when you publish music, you sell your rights to that publisher, which is
why I'm self-published.
Right, which is one of the reasons you and a lot of other composers self-publish their music.
It's a lot of work, by the way. Like, don't underestimate. I actually, just on the topic of self-publishing, small tangent, but very related, I think. It is a good idea to self-publish if you can do it right. And the biggest part of doing it right is kind of having a stock, so to say. Like, you know, I've got 2 or 3 copies of each of my chamber music scores just sitting on a shelf. And that's aside from my private, like, library of what I've written. And that is on purpose so that, like, for instance, whenever we had our guest composer several weeks ago, and I knew that he was writing a bass piece, I was like, I've got a bass piece right here. And I should have brought 2 copies, honestly, one for the composer, one for the performer. But they worked at the same school and they were friends, so I was like, honestly, 1 score is good enough. I'm cheap, I'm a grad student. But no, and having that ability to just hand people physical copies, it adds a lot more legitimacy. And I've found that I actually get better responses from people than if I just give them a PDF. And I know that sounds weird and stupid in an age where people are all about digitizing, but there's something to be said about having a legitimate hard copy score that says, in my case, DeVisi Labs on the bottom, as opposed to just a PDF.
Humans are physical beings, and I think we associate something with even merely that act of handing the score over, and it's also, you know, if somebody emails you a score, you know, it can easily get lost in all the, you know, hundreds and hundreds of emails you get. But if you have a physical copy and it's sitting on your piano, you know, or it's sitting on your desk, it's, you know, even if you've forgotten about it, you're suddenly walking by and it's like, oh, there's that score.
Got a whole collection of them over there.
Well, and it's also why, and I know we've talked about this, and I think I've talked about this with some of our faculty here at OU too. If you want somebody to play your piece, or even if you just want somebody to look at it, you know, a colleague, you know, is this playable, such and such. You don't email it to them. Walk up to them with a copy of the score with their part and hand it to them and say, here, I want you to play for me.
After you know the person. If you just do it to a person you don't know, then opposite things will happen.
That's true. Introduce yourself. You know, get to know the person first.
Yeah.
But
don't just do this number. Here, I wrote a guitar piece.
And I mean, I'm sure if you approached somebody, you know, in person and it was like, oh, so and so recommended you, and
having a second tier connection is huge, actually, because that establishes as much legitimacy as can possibly be had.
You can walk up to somebody you don't know, but you need to, like, actually have a point of introduction, and, you know, so and so told me that you were a good violin player and recommended you if I needed this performed. Would you be willing to take a look at it? Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure.
I totally agree. Yeah, but yeah, so keep that stuff in mind. Whether you self-publish, do elsewhere, even if you're not technically self-publishing, have a hard copy of your score so that you can do that kind of stuff, and it adds all the legitimacy. So yeah, a tangent, but I feel a useful tangent.
Back to our original topic.
The too perfect thing. I think that a lot of this is, I mean, yeah, it's too perfect because now we have our expectations set too high, but if you enter the problem knowing that that's a problem, then I don't think it's a problem.
And of course, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a degree of polishment and refinement for a recording that we wouldn't necessarily expect from a live performance. Because in a live performance, you never know what's going to happen in the moment. I think the problem is that we in our modern technological age, we've been so conditioned to hear recordings, and if you think about the general public, they're hearing popular music on the radio or on their iPod all the time. That music sounds nothing like it would if you nothing like it would if you actually performed it in front of an audience.
Well, and also
live.
with that music, it's easier to have a master recording because you're having 4 or 5 performers, and that's it, as opposed to, you know, an orchestra.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to expect perfection.
And popular music
that.
in the modern sense is really an inherently recorded medium. It's really something that we haven't had in music history until the 20th century, is the idea of music like pop music or fixed media pieces that exist in a definitive form on recording.
Even then, like, because, I don't know, it's... I think the only one where you can have truly perfect recordings and where it should matter is for tape music, for fixed media. I mean, I think that's something that... Because obviously it's the same thing played everywhere. There's really not much variance there, and I think with everything else you should expect some variance. You should expect one of the bassists to kind of do a fatter pizzicato on that one note, as opposed to everybody else just doing the single finger snap. And you know, you should expect to, whenever you hear a violin section doing the pizzicato movement of the Tchaikovsky symphony, you should expect to hear not one unified voice, but a chorus of violins, and that chorus will always be different.
I agree, but I think because people have been so conditioned by hearing recordings all the time, they don't necessarily expect that.
Right.
Which is partially an educational problem, and it's not something that, you know, it's not like we can take recordings away, but but I mean, I also think that it may be something that recording engineers need to rethink in their own. The way they work on pieces. Perhaps we can admit a little more imperfection into our recording processes.
But then that makes them look bad.
Right. Which is the vicious cycle. And of course you have, I mean, in popular music you have artists out there that record live or have a little more of a raw sound on their recordings. I don't know what you are doing, but
I was showing off my...
Is that Mozart or...
No,
that's Beethoven, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got a quote, "Music is a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy." I agree.
I don't. I don't think it's higher, it's simply different.
Yeah, I think it's
anyway.
So, yeah, just, you know, it's just something to mull over. But, so, which... Do you want to... decide?
We've been talking about popular music, so we might as well continue doing such.
So what should our relationship with popular music be?
Right.
I mean, I personally, I think that there's a lot to be learned both ways. I think that popular music has always, you know, learned from classical music, or I guess I'll just say composed music is the way that I'm referring to it. Popular music and composed music. Popular music tends to learn a lot from composed music. And composed music, I think we should start learning from pop music. I think there's some that have, but some people that are just like, oh my gosh, I can't learn anything from those guys. They just sit up on stage and do this. I don't want anything to do with that. But there was a debate on, I don't remember what group it was, but on Facebook months ago there was, I think this was like midsummer, there was an argument about atonality and tonality, and someone had commented, why is everybody still trying to make atonality happen? It's not a thing. It's never going to happen. And I took that, and I feel that my response was pretty relevant. And basically, to summarize, I ended up basically saying, well, first of all, I was like, well, first of all, we're not trying to make it happen. Atonality has happened and is still happening frequently. Get over it type thing. Like, it's here. It's not going away. But I also continued into an argument about, why are we still arguing about this? Pop music pretty much skipped that argument. And they're better off for it. Because they just see them both as tools. Like, oh, I can compose a 1-5-1 or a 2-5-1. Or I can just write whatever the heck I want. Whatever sounds correct. And they see those all as equally viable tools. And that's something that, I mean, some composers are doing, but honestly, not enough. Because everybody's like, well, I'm an atonal composer. I'm a tonal composer. I'm whatever. I'm a kitten composer. I mean, why would you shoehorn yourself into such a narrow field of focus to say, atonality stinks or tonality is dead, whatever? I mean, I think all those arguments are silly. We shouldn't be having this argument anymore. And pop music, I think, is ahead of the game on this because they skipped that argument entirely, and they're just like, we're just going to do what we want to do.
Well, to a degree, pop music didn't entirely skip that argument. In jazz, for example, there was which I mean, jazz is popular music. I mean, it's been really a lot of classical music is popular music too. It's been academicized, but that's where jazz came from, and You had that debate in in the 60s and 70s with free jazz and the like. I think, but I do see where you're coming from, and that if you look at popular music, and to clarify, when I talk about popular music, I'm not just talking about what you hear on the radio. We're talking about popular music in general. There's a lot of really great popular artists whose music isn't necessarily mainstream. Who write music that's much more musically interesting and intellectually appealing than Taylor Swift or
to you there are some that would actually argue against you, but that is your view.
I know there are. I just think they're wrong.
Well, but moving past that.
Most pop music does tend to be tonal in the sense of there being tonal centers, but it's really in a very expanded vision of tonality. It's a lot of pop artists. When I write, I don't think they sit down and are concerned with, am I writing something that's in a tonal idiom or an atonal idiom, like you're talking about. And I know in my own music, I don't think tonality and atonality are really useful categories to think of. It's just music, and the various harmonic or melodic techniques have been used for centuries, or recently, and anything I come up with is just a tool. So yeah, I think on a broader sense, when we talk about pop music, I think there's a lot of academic composers who take an attitude that pop music is in some way it's inherently intellectually inferior to classical music, and I think that's misguided. Like I said, I think there's a lot of really bad popular music out there. I think a lot of what you hear on the radio is just musically meaningless. But a lot of music in general is bad. There are lots of bad classical composers and jazz musicians, and there's bad music everywhere. And I think when we talk about pop music, it's important not to compare the worst of popular styles with the best of what the classical tradition has to offer. And really, if you look at, I think, a lot of really good popular albums and songs, really what it's doing is continuing on the classical art song tradition. Because, the modern art song, with composers, like Berg and others who took it to a very intellectual academic place, doesn't really do the same thing as a song by Schubert, or Mozart or even Debussy does. That's a short lyric piece that does have a very immediate connection with an audience, and I think that's a kind of a void in classical music that popular music stepped in to fill. And
well, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily that it kind of took the place of that leader and all that. I think the problem came when someone, Wagner, decided to nail all the seats down in the auditorium. And I think at that point, it was being stated, hey, this is music of a different degree, a different caliber. I mean, before this, yeah, you had different kinds of concerts, but the same venue would host, a concert of Mendelssohn, Mozart, and Beethoven, followed the next night by some, just guitar trio or something. I mean, it was not unheard of to have such things.
Right.
But now they were establishing these venues that kind of purposely excluded. And you know, I myself, I'm not a huge fan of much of the popular music. And honestly, a lot of people do accuse me of like what he just mentioned of, oh, the composed music is of a higher intellect, it's better, all that jazz. That's not really what I think. I joke about it sometimes. But really, my thought process comes down to, and I think that this is something a lot of people ignore, it just doesn't do it for me. And part of that is, I mean, I'm just not a huge fan of, you know, the sound of a guitar. There are some people that hate the tuba. There's some people that hate flute and piccolo. There's some people that hate oboe. I don't like guitar. And that is a huge reason why I don't. I mean, I can find parts of popular music that I thoroughly enjoy. Like, you know, your guitar sonata, I thoroughly enjoy significant portions of that.
I mean,
musically
I wouldn't
speaking.
call that, you know, really in a popular music idiom. But
No,
it is
but
guitar.
I'm talking about the guitar
Yes.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, so I'm not completely averse to this stuff. But something that a lot of people on both sides accuse the other side of is, well, you're not hearing us out. And that might be part of the problem. And people automatically assume that I'm not hearing them out with it. They're automatically assuming, oh, well, you just haven't given Led Zeppelin and Rush and AC/DC, all these bands, a chance. And it's like, well, actually, I have. I mean, I never truly ignore something 100%. I mean, I'll take even a small sampling of something, and then I will at that point determine, is this even worth me continuing? I mean, there's even some composed music guys that I at first ignored, and sometimes I still ignore them, and other times someone will bring them back up in a new light, and I'm like, I like this guy. Why wasn't I introduced to this stuff? And, you know, I think the big thing between popular music and otherwise is that we need to create more of a symbiotic relationship. We need to learn from each other. We need to build off of each other. You know, you need to take ideas from popular music that work. Things like, you know, my big reaction post that I had to somebody on a Facebook group over the summer. Why are we still having this age-old debate of atonality versus tonality? And at the same point, why are we still having this argument between, you know, what should we learn from popular music? The point should be you should take from it what you want. If you want to take from it, oh, I want to take the chord structures. Okay, take the chord structures. Some of the chord structures are admittedly boring, but they're perfectly fine. They make for a well-composed piece of music. If you want to take from popular music, let's just say, I don't know, the idea of almost every piece having some sort of soloistic section for the lead instrument. Go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we have entire forms dedicated to that. Concerto, sonata, etc. You know, if you want to take from there, oh, I want to have always a driving beat. Okay, minimalist music. Like, seriously, like, you can't sit there and mutually exclude them from each other.
For me, it's not even as much, you know, taking a particular element and integrating it always into my music. It's like you look at what composers like, I mean, Bach and Mozart and all these classical composers did. They took popular forms and dances and used them in their music as you know, as they saw fit. I recently wrote, well, it's in my guitar sonata you were mentioning. The entire final movement is based on a blues form.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that I'm writing in the blues idiom, but I've taken something from it because it worked for that piece. I did the same thing with an art song, and this has been being done throughout music history. It's simply that, and I think it has a lot to do with what, I mean, people have referred to as museum culture. You know, in the 19th century, we started having this idea of the genius artist, you know, whose methods cannot be questioned, and whose music must go on for eternity and push out all new music and all music before them also. Which is, we kind of boxed into this mythology around the classical tradition that doesn't want to admit new and outside influences.
Right. Well, the museum culture thing, it does bring up an interesting point. I mean, I've heard this idea proposed, and you and I have talked a bit about it, but just something I wanted to bring up to anybody viewing is, I mean, is there anything wrong inherently with a museum? And to that point, I mean, I'm not saying we should evict Mozart and Beethoven from the concert halls. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, I mean, you know, who's to say that, you know, a museum, because most museums have some sort of auditorium or presentation area. Who's to say that 3 nights a week you can't go there and, you know, any good string player, at least, I don't know about the other instrument groups, but any good string player can read down a Bach or a Mozart piece to at least the performance standards of the 1700s with next to no rehearsal.
Well, in the 1700s they didn't have a lot of
they had some rehearsals.
They did, but
it's because our technique has improved, our knowledge has improved.
Right.
We can look at a composer, we can know, okay, I need to have my bow ready to do this, I need to, you know, use this, I need to, you know, hang my A flats a little lower, things like that. And honestly, I don't know if there's such a problem with, I mean, because yeah, we do need to kind of honor the past, so to speak, which is kind of what museums do. And, you know, why couldn't there be a house chamber orchestra? That would be much more period accurate, honestly, than having our symphony orchestra here at OU. Just be like, okay, so for half the concert, we're just going to boot off 2/3 of our players because we want to do these Mozart pieces. It's like, well, that's fine, but not every time. Because, I mean, you need to kind of get with the times, so to speak. And, you know, if we were to have these kind of museum ensembles, I'll call them, there'd be nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'd go to a lot of those shows. Like, if they were to do an old school show where it'd be, you know, just say several Mozart pieces where a symphony is presented throughout with piano concerto filling in between the movements, which was a pretty popular way of putting together a concert back then, I would totally go to 1 or 2 of those a week. I mean, those are cool concerts to me. And I think that, you know, if you were to have that going, because you also have the dual thing of, you know, you can listen to some great music and you've got some cool exhibits to go check out. And I think that there's something to that. And I don't remember who proposed it to me, but at first I was a little averted to it. But the more I think about it, the more I'm just like, this is actually a really cool idea, because then both parties win. And I think that basically our reverence for Mozart, Beethoven, just barely all of those, I think that that's ultimately what's kind of chaining us down. I mean, no, we shouldn't evict them. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why, you know, the OKC Phil can't play, you know, Mozart 40 occasionally, or why, you know, the New York Phil can't play, you know, Beethoven 5 every now and then. But, you know, there are lots of great works that, I mean, honestly, in my opinion, they just don't belong in the contemporary repertoire. Things like, you know, the first couple symphonies of Beethoven. They're fantastic pieces of music, but, I mean, honestly, there's, in my opinion, much more relevant stuff being written now or in the last 100 years that, you know, if we were to kind of have this other split, not really a split, but more kind of a divergence, then, I mean, I think there could be something to that. And I think that we've kind of started that a little bit, because now you can get period performance degrees from places like Oberlin, where you actually rehearse on period instruments, and you give concerts on period instruments, and it's separate from the contemporary orchestra. I think it's really cool. Why don't we do that? I can't,
and we've talked about this. I can't quite agree with you on everything. Like, I don't think we should necessarily kick Beethoven 1 and 2 out of the concert hall, for example.
I'm not kicking them out. I'm just reducing them significantly. And downsizing, if you will.
And I do agree with that. If we're going to play more new music, of course, the amount of oversaturated amount of, you know, common practice period music we do will have to be reduced in the contemporary concert hall. But it brings up the point. I mean, think about it this way: we have ensembles that specialize in early music, you know, Baroque or medieval and Renaissance performance. We also have ensembles that specialize in contemporary music or, you know, late 20th century music. But we don't have ensembles that specialize in you know, classical or romantic music, or rather we do. We call them our orchestras.
Unfortunately, yes, and they kind of have to serve a dual purpose.
And when we have this ensemble that, I mean, really is still today, the symphony orchestra is the flagship ensemble of the classical tradition. It just, I mean,
honestly, of music itself, it is like, I mean, think about it. I mean, if like a piece is if someone asks you to You don't ask someone to orchestrate, for instance, a rock tune for wind quintet.
Right. It's like now every rock band has to do an album, with orchestra or something like that.
Yeah, and orchestra in it. It's because orchestra is just, it's like, it's the long-standing thing. There's ensembles that don't exist anymore, but orchestras.
And despite the 20th century kind of ebbing away a little bit at the symphonic tradition, we've had reactions against it when more composers have been writing chamber music and stuff like this. The orchestra really does still maintain its prominence as the flagship ensemble. And the flagship ensemble is really... many of them are just period ensembles. They perform music from 1750 to 1900. Or, well, maybe 1920, because they'll do Debussy and Ravel and stuff like
or they'll
that.
do, like, the Firebird Suite, the original one.
Right.
I mean, and again, stuff like that, I mean... It's kind of like there's been an issue here for the past couple... Not an issue, but it's more just kind of been a question here lately. And I'll ask you, since you're new here. So we have the New Century Ensemble, correct?
Right.
What would you say if I told you that ensemble played a piece from 1890 last year?
I mean, that's a little weird. But was it a Debussy piece or something?
Yeah, it was a flute piece.
Yeah, I mean, like... You see, the thing about... I mean, the New Century Ensemble... I mean, it's really...
It's kind of really, a 1900s ensemble.
It's more of a 20th century ensemble, and Debussy is we kind of consider him 20th century, even though most of his music was written in the 19th century.
So New Century implies new, correct?
Right.
Here's my argument. That Debussy one is only one thing removed if you think, oh, New Century Ensemble, 20th century. It's 2017. We're in the 21st century, so the New Century Ensembles... by all means, should be doing 21st century music.
And I think, so, that's maybe, one of the things that would be a good thing to have here is New Century is really a 20th century ensemble. We don't have
it's really good. I love it.
Yeah, we don't have a dedicated new music ensemble.
Well, we kind of do.
Well, we have the
New Century Improv is 50-50. It depends what you write.
But that's also a very specific genre of...
Not particular. I had them do my laptop quartet. I mean, that was...
Yeah. But I mean, you know what I mean. It's not an ensemble dedicated simply to new music. It's an ensemble dedicated to improvisational music, and which much
that
of
tends
to
lean towards the 21st century.
Right. Whereas you're missing a lot of the repertoire of the 21st century that's not improvisation.
Well, and I think that's much like we separate theory into 20th century theory, let's say 1800s counterpoint, 1900s counterpoint, 1700s counterpoint, 1600s, like all these different theory courses for all these different periods of music. We do the same with musicology. Here's your Baroque class, here's your classical class, here's your romantic class, here's your late romantic class, here's your early Baroque, all that stuff. And well, honestly, why don't we do that with our ensembles to a point? And
I think
this is the OU late romantic ensemble. There's a lot of good repertoire that's never played. It's because a lot of it is kind of the same-ish. It's like, oh yay, all hail the leader for a while. But in general, it's not a bad idea. And I don't know.
I think you do need your ensemble. This is why I do think it is important that symphony orchestras keep their connection to the tradition. That we continue to play...
It's the anchor,
yeah. That we continue to play Mozart and Beethoven and Berlioz and Brahms and well, not really Wagner because it wasn't a symphonic composer. But
we do play a lot of Wagner,
play a lot of like overtures
and particular.
And stuff.
Actually, not even that. We do big arrangements. Like we do, for instance, one thing that's been done. And bands too. Elsa's Procession to the Cathedral from Tannhauser. Like that's like a staple for some groups. Particularly bands and string orchestras. It's just it's a really good piece. Why wouldn't you play it?
True. That side note, but we do some Wagner. Debussy, even Debussy, Ravel, these early 20th century composers. I think it is important for our flagship ensembles to keep our connection to the tradition, because if we lose our connection to the tradition, then we don't have a classical tradition anymore. We just have whatever happens to be happening in the moment. But there's a difference between a respect for tradition and a traditionalism that gets you stuck in the past. Right. I personally believe that, at the very least, every concert, or mostly every concert. I mean, you might have one where it's like, we're going to do an all Mozart program or something like that for a specialty event. Sure.
Right.
Pretty much every concert should have at least, in my opinion, one work by a living composer.
And again, this is why my high school orchestra conductor, he is now doing the Springfield Youth Symphony. That's the regional kind of honors orchestra type thing. And I've been saying for years, and people are like, "Oh, that's a good idea." He has found the perfect concert formula. Every concert, just about, he premieres a work, not just plays something new, premieres a work by oftentimes a student composer. Like, I mean, I was premiered twice under him. It was great. I felt wonderful. But here's what my piece was surrounded by, just so that you have some context. So we had, let's just take the one from my senior year, Celebration. It was surrounded by Mozart 40, okay, and Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd. I kid you not.
That's great.
This is not... Well, no, and, like, it's because he premieres a piece nearly every concert. At least, I think, 2 of his 3 concerts a year premiere a piece. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what he does. So you have that, and then he also always does kind of a rock tune that's been arranged for orchestra, which is a great way to kind of get people to come in. And he also always does some of the standard rep, and then he also, almost every concert, has something from the 20th or 21st century written by a major composer.
Well, and you know, what do modern symphony orchestras do? They have, you know, their summer or their pops program or their summer program where they do a concert of Pink Floyd or a concert of Springsteen. I don't want to go to a 2-hour concert where the orchestra just plays Pink Floyd.
Some people love that though.
But if there was a Pink Floyd piece on a concert that wasn't necessarily the entire focus, I would think that was cool. And a lot of the people who might go to hear that would also get to hear some contemporary classical music, some music from the, you know, common practice repertoire, but we've separated them out into these little boxes. We might have our 20th century show, or we might, you know, have our pop music show, and so there's no cross pollination.
Right. I don't know. I think it's an important topic to at least think about once or twice in your life, because, you know, our relationship to popular music and, you know, kind of antique music, so to speak. I think it's important to think of our relation to both idioms and cross idioms, and, you know, also look at kind of our place within culture itself. And, you know, I think it's worthwhile thought process. I don't know. I mean, you guys let us know what you think. I mean, it's a big topic. It's a fun topic. Don't touch the microphone. But yeah, it's an interesting topic. But yeah, just let us know what you think. And we had a few things that we were going to try and chat about today, but we kind of got distracted a lot during the news segment by lots of tangents. But next time we'll be talking about a couple things, including actually, I'm going to try and shoehorn this in at the end. Really
we have
quick.
1 minute.
Yeah, 2 minutes. So, getting into a composition program, am I inadequate? This is something that someone sent me from Reddit, actually, of all places. Someone posted on one of the composition Reddit subpages, hey, I've just got this, like, one piece that's actually done, and then a bunch of melodies that I've written. I'm afraid that my, hopefully, future composition professor is going to laugh at me. And the thing that I already typed out to him in a full response, and, you know, what I'm also going to say here is, honestly, they're looking more for what can be done, not what has been done. They're looking more at kind of compatibility thing. So, like, if Jacob comes to me, wants composition lessons, and we're just staring across the desk at each other really awkwardly, like, it doesn't matter how much music or how little music he brought me, nothing's going to be done. And
ultimately, you know, for those out there who might be listening and just starting out, if you're trying to get into music school, a teacher who isn't looking more for potential and is looking more for somebody who already knows what's going on might not be the person you want to look with. If you're just starting out, you want to work with somebody who's going to develop your potential, who doesn't necessarily care that you don't have a lot of music written, but who sees they could do this, and I want to develop them in this way.
And it's something that's it's something that's very important, and it's like, you know, when I first went to my first composition professor, Carlisle Sharp, this was, I guess, after my sophomore year of high school, I kind of thought similar. I mean, I kind of ended up with the opposite problem. I had like a stack of music, and I thought that was inadequate.
Yeah.
That was my problem. Not to mention, I printed everything single-sided too, because I was that special. But no, I mean, he wasn't looking so much at the breadth of it. He was looking at the depth. He was sitting there, and I still remember to this day, he was opening this isn't a score, this is a program. He was opening it, he was just kind of focusing in. I could see him with his eyes just kind of magnifying closer and closer on individual segments of the music and seeing the stuff that I had done. He fully listened to only one of the pieces that I brought in. I brought in like 7. And he just kind of glanced at parts of the others. And after I believe it was almost 2 hours of our meeting, he ended up just saying, "What's your goal?" And when I told him, I want to write music. I enjoy writing music. I enjoy writing for concerts. And at that point, he pretty much was like, "I'll help you out. Yeah, I mean, I'll help you get into a college, and I'll give you some lessons in the meantime. Because you came here and you didn't, and you came here and you're like, I don't want to write film music." Because apparently it's a huge, if you're seeking a classical composer to take lessons with, it's apparently a huge turnoff to walk up to them and say, "I'm going to be a film composer." You're not going to be as high priority on their list, apparently. I didn't know that, but I just said it because I was just not interested in film music. Still am not. But, yeah, I mean, they're more interested in what you can do, not what you have done. And keep in mind, most of the time whenever you're meeting these professors, it's a compatibility test. It's really is this someone that I can see myself locked in a room for an hour a week with for the next potentially 4 years?
And that's basically every job interview you will ever be a part of.
I think it's actually more intimidating, honestly. But anyway, so yeah, that's my tidbit on that. It was kind of shoehorned in at the end, but I feel we covered it nicely. Yeah. But I really wanted to touch on that because it's very relevant within the last 48 hours. So I kind of wanted to touch on that. But yeah, you know, we've got some stuff for next week. We're going to be talking a bit about kind of the role of the library system in being a composer, whether it be while you're studying or, you know, after you're studying or even, you know, post-mortem.
We're going to talk about 12-tone music and whether it's still relevant to composers today.
And then also, is music a language? I think it is, but, you know, we'll talk about some more details with that. But in the meantime, this is Composer Talks, signing out of week 4.
Adios, amigos.
Peace out.
Peace. Jinx, sell me a Coke.
I'm not buying you a Coke.
I already have Coke.